Thank you, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, it's been a pretty hard day for people today. If you think about it, people who watched the press conference at 11 a.m. this morning got the shocking news about the New South Wales cases, and that followed on from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's Working Group report, which was very depressing, very depressing. It was a sober wake-up call for a nation and a world that didn't need one, to be quite honest. But we can't ignore the truth. And the truth is that scientists are observing climate changes in every region and across the whole climate system. Many of the changes already observed are unprecedented in thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Modelling of all 5 trajectories that they looked at has average temperatures at more than 1.5 degrees Celsius higher by the 2030s, a figure we were hoping to avoid to much later in this century. The report finds that with 1.5 degrees of global warming, the impacts will include changes to rainfall patterns with impacts on agriculture, continued sea level rises contributing to more flooding, increased permafrost thawing, melting of glaciers and ice sheets and loss of summer Arctic ice, and changes to the ocean dramatically affecting the ocean ecosystems. The good news is, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that the report finds that human actions still have the potential to limit climate change, and we should never lose sight of that fact. It is not too late to change this and avoid the worst of climate change, but it will require strong, rapid and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, including getting to net zero emissions. And that's why Labor has been consistent in our support for strong action on climate change. We are the only party of government that has ever taken real action on climate change. We are the only party of government that has legislated a hard cap on greenhouse gas emissions, and we've taken strong climate change policies to every election since 1993. Since 1993, we've had strong policies on climate change. And we do this not just because it's the right thing for the environment, but because it's the right thing for the economy. It's the right thing for the economy because the economic impact of unconstrained climate change will be disastrous for Australia. Conversely, if we seize the economic opportunities that comes with the move to decarbonise the world, Australia can benefit more than most, if not every other nation on the earth. And this is a story people are familiar with. They understand this in their guts, that we have the privilege of being on the continent with the greatest solar radiation in the world. If anyone can seize the opportunities of solar power, it's Australia. We've also got great wind resources, both onshore and offshore. That means that we can have a burgeoning supply of solar and wind power, not just to power Australia, but to power Southeast Asia. And that's something that's really exciting, something that the private sector is seizing right now. We've got all the key inputs into renewable energy manufacturing and battery manufacturing. We can also manufacture batteries, and we've seen great proposals both at Townsville and in the Hunter, in the member for Patterson's own electorate. They can have a huge impact on local communities. There's also no reason why we can't manufacture electric vehicles in this country. And the one I'm most passionate about, hydrogen and energy-intensive manufacturing. If we can just grab 6.5% of the global green steel market, we could have 25,000 manufacturing jobs in places like Newcastle and Gladstone making green steel. And I'm really passionate about the Steel City becoming the Steel City again. These are the opportunities, and these are the opportunities that Labor has supported throughout its period. That's why under Anthony Albanese we've announced the $20 billion Rewiring the Nation fund. That's why we've announced the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. That's why we've announced $200 million for community batteries and $200 million for electric vehicles. We are the party that's committed to taking strong action on climate change to help the environment and to seize the economic opportunities that come with it. Because unlike those opposite, we won't bury our heads in the sand. We will not bury our heads in the sand. Now, in the time remaining, I'm going to give people a little foretaste, a taste of what they're going to get from the Minister for Emissions Reduction, who will give us 10 minutes of mendacity, 10 minutes of a number soup, where his entire strategy is just to throw numbers at you. Throw numbers at you until you're entirely confused by what has gone on. And the first number I predict he'll use, and I'm a bit of a fortune teller, but based on the Prime Minister today and yesterday, I think I've got a good chance, is that they'll brag about the fact that Australia has reduced its emissions by 20% since 2005. And that's true. That's true. But how do we get that 20% reduction since 2005? Well, in the first 2 years between 05 and 07 under John Howard, emissions actually increased by 2.4%. They didn't go down, they went up. Under the Rudd and Gillard Labor governments between 07 and 2013, emissions fell by a massive 14%. 14%. And what's happened since then? Well, between 2013 and 2019, under the Abbott-Turnbull-Morrison government, annual emissions fell by 4%. And then last year, emissions fell by another 4%. So that means, exactly, and I'll come to that, member for Morton. So 20% reduction since 2005, 14% by Labor, 6% by the Liberal National Party, and yet they brag about that. But when you break down their 6%, how do they get to the 6%? Well, guess how much of the 6% came from Labor's renewable energy target that they've tried to abolish time after time. In fact, the member for Hume, the minister, got pre-selected and then elected in his seat on an anti-wind farm, anti-RED agenda. So of their 6%, guess how much came from Labor's renewable energy target? 5.7 percentage points. 5.7 percentage points. And guess where the rest came from? The rest came from the first recession in 30 years last year. The one that the minister was bragging about because it took the cars off the road last year. He was actually using it as a bragging point. So of their 6%, 5.7 percentage points from Labor's RET, the rest by dropping us into a recession. I can't believe this minister can look himself in the mirror, quite frankly, let alone come into this chamber and make the claims that he's about to make. The second claim will be that in 2020, emissions under them will be 100 million tonnes lower than what they were under Labor, projected to be by 2020. Well, the truth is, in 2013, emissions in 2020 were projected to be 656 million tonnes. The actual outcome was 499 million tonnes. So on the face of it, the minister can make that claim. But those projections were revised down every year, basically, of the last decade. 2016, 559, 2017, 551, 2018, 540, 2019, 534. But what caused these reductions in the projections of how much our economy will emit? Their strong action on climate change? Their stable and consistent energy policy? No. From their own documents, from the government's own projection documents, they say these downward emissions projections were caused by the impact of the drought on the farming sector, by the decline of manufacturing emissions because they closed the automotive industry, and by Labor's RET. By Labor's RET. So the three reasons emissions were 100 million tonnes lower was because there was a drought, because they killed the car industry, destroying 50,000 jobs, and because Labor's RET. That's the truth of all the numbers the Minister for Emissions will throw at us in this debate. And the third one, and the most offensive one, quite frankly, because the rest is history, this is the worst one, is that they will meet and beat their 28% reduction target by 2030. Well, their own documents contradict that. Their own documents predict that by 2030, emissions will only be 23% lower than 2005. Only 23%. So their own documents are surrender documents. Their own documents surrender and say they will not meet the target. And then the worst will be the taxes not technology line from the minister. Well, Minister, unless you've got a money tree, the only way you promote technology is to create incentives,
on both sides.
is to create subsidies. To pay for it, the government has to do what? Use taxes. This is a government that is totally bereft on climate change. This is a government that is betraying not only future generations but the current generation by denying us the economic opportunities that are associated with taking strong action on climate change. Those on this side of Parliament, those on the Labor side are committed to net zero emissions by 2050. We'll have strong medium-term policies announced before the next election. And more importantly, we've got a track record of when in government, taking action on climate change, seizing the economic opportunities that are going with it, and not betraying future generations like those on the opposite side. They talk about family values. but they're undermining the Australian family just as we speak.